And good morning. Welcome to First Presbyterian Church's Ministry to Men, our Men's Reformed Fellowship. We meet every Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, but it comes online with our YouTube channel at 9:15. So I hope you're able to join us from week to week. We have been engaging in I would say, a remarkable study by Dr. Peter Lillback on our Constitution, and particularly the issue of the relationship between church and state, which is so debated in our country, particularly at this time in our nation's history. The book we're working through is Wall of Misconception. It's kind of a takeoff of the idea of a wall of separation that people quote from Thomas Jefferson. And the Lillback's point is in part that they've understood what Jefferson was trying to say in that metaphor. He was not trying to deny the functioning of the Christian faith through its various churches within the life history of our nation, or particularly within the federal government. After all, the federal government has a chaplain that serves in the Congress, or chaplains. They have a annual celebration of Thanksgiving, giving thanks to God for his many blessings, going all the way back to George Washington. We have all kinds of things that on our coins. We have "In God We Trust." Is that an establishment of religion? Is that a violation of the clause, the First Amendment? Our point is no, not at all. You have also the Pledge of Allegiance, in which we pledge to one nation under God. Is that an establishment of religion? Is that a violation of the First Amendment? Not at all. Our modern day, our secularists, basically Marxists and communists, are trying to drive out the Christian faith from our government system, so that in effect they can have a Marxist, socialist government, atheistic government, to inaugurate their own particular views of how the nation should be guided and directed. So this comes up just over the past week. There was a case that came before the Supreme Court out of Oklahoma, where a Roman Catholic charter school, St. Isidore's, in Oklahoma City, was applying for federal subsidies, for at least state subsidies. I'm not certain of that, but public school support. And the legislature in Oklahoma provided for that possibility, but suit was filed against this action, and the Supreme Court of Oklahoma denied the request of St. Isidore to have public funding for their Roman Catholic charter school. In part, the gentleman who opposed this and took it to the Oklahoma Supreme Court argued that if the government is going to be supporting St. Isidore's, first, that's an establishment of religion and an endorsement of the Christian faith in his view, and I don't see that. We can talk about that perhaps a little bit. But he also said, which was kind of interesting, that if they fund St. Isidore's, then we've got to be ready to fund Muslim religious schools that would advocate for Sharia law and so forth. And so that does get you into some issues as to whether it is appropriate for the American federal government or the public school system to support an Islamic school which advocates for Sharia law, which is really incompatible with the American Constitution and our way of life. So that was something of the argument. It bumped up to the U.S. Supreme Court on appeal, and Justice Amy Coney Barrett recused herself. I didn't hear why she did. The reports that I saw did not indicate why. Maybe there is a reason published. I suspect that, as I believe she taught at Notre Dame and their law school, perhaps she felt that she was too closely attached to the Roman Catholic Church and thought that in some way that she would not be able to have a.
She is Roman Catholic.
Yeah, she is Roman Catholic, but she's not the only Roman Catholic on the Supreme Court. Right. Clarence Thomas is Roman Catholic, and I think Kavanaugh, maybe Alito, I believe, are a Roman Catholic. Maybe even Judge Roberts, I don't know. Maybe a couple of the others, I don't know. But Coney Barrett recused herself from that. So there was a decision with 8 justices, and they ended up on a 4-4 split. They didn't say why they opposed or why they would support the Oklahoma Supreme Court. They just kind of cast it back and said, we're not going to interfere with that. And so therefore, St. Isidore's appeal was denied, nor did they indicate which judges landed on either side. I think we can speculate on that. I would imagine that the 3 appointees from Obama and Biden voted against the Oklahoma Supreme Court, or voted in favor of the Oklahoma Supreme Court, sided with it, as probably Justice John Roberts as well, the Chief Justice. He tends to swing to the left here, and then on the right you would have the more conservative wing on the Supreme Court with Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, Judge Kavanaugh, and who's the fourth one? Gorsuch, yes, of course. So it's a contemporary issue that gets batted around in our courts. The one thing, again, that came up in the reporting that I saw was that the complaint was that this would be an establishment and endorsement of a particular religion, the Christian religion. Well, the Supreme Court has already said that we are a Christian religion, a Christian nation. So the Christian religion is the foundation for our nation's history. It's been the culture of our nation for quite some time. To say that this is an establishment of a religion is false. It's just one particular school within the broad panoply of schools, Christian, secular, what have you. The Christian religion is, if you will, already established in our nation. What the First Amendment forbids and stands against is the establishment of a particular denomination of the Christian religion as becoming a national church. And that was in relationship to what we had in Europe when you had state churches like the Anglican Church in England, Lutheran Church in Germany, a Roman Catholic Church in Italy and France and Spain and so forth. And so the American colonies and the American Constitution was opposed to a national church, but they weren't opposed to the expression of the Christian faith within the public sphere. And so therefore, the First Amendment, it carefully balances the idea that the government shall not establish a religion, in particular, a particular church, nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. And it's this free exercise of the church here that seems to me to be in view. So in any case, however you come down on that, it's clearly a contemporary issue that we are contending with. And indeed, the book itself was based on a court case arising out of our Chester courthouse here in southeast Pennsylvania. So that's kind of the generating point from which this book arises. So we have been making our way through the one of the last chapters in the book, chapter 9, George Washington's constitutional precedents for the centrality of the Judeo-Christian values in the public square. And so we talked about that last time, particularly noting Washington's Thanksgiving declaration for a national celebration of Thanksgiving to Almighty God, acknowledging his many benefits, praying for his blessing on the nation. And Washington did this not as an executive order like Mr. Trump is doing with a number of things and just this is what he wants, and he's the elected president. He has the authority to do that. This was at the request of the Congress. And so Washington wasn't just doing this on his own, expressing his own Christian faith, but it was the request of Congress, who had just, I believe it is just the previous day, drafted the First Amendment. So either they didn't understand the amendment that they themselves wrote, or they completely violated the very next day with this request of Washington. Washington gives an outstanding statement calling for the nation to give thanks to God on an annual basis. So we're going to go further into Washington's understanding of the Constitution and how it's structured, how it's formed. And we'll see in the way the Constitution is formed how the Christian faith, the Christian religion, very much informed, shaped, modeled the American Constitution. And so to say that Christian faith is not a part of the government, that the government is purely secular, is, as it were, to deny the very DNA of our Constitution. It's to try to strip a human being of his genetic code. This is how the Constitution was formed. You can no sooner withdraw all the chromosomes out of a human being and all the whole strands of DNA molecules and so forth, withdraw them from an individual and have the individual survive. It's just, you don't have the same thing if you withdraw the elements of the Christian faith that have formed and fashioned our Constitution. So we're going to see that through what Washington has to say about this Constitution and how it was formed. And there's a lot of information here that Lilbeck has, not simply in the text of the book, but the footnotes as well are amply supported in terms of letters and communications between George Washington and Lafayette, who had a great interest in what was happening here in the American Revolution and the formation of our nation's history. So I'll probably touch on some of those letters, but we won't get into reading them because they get to be a little bit extensive here. But let me direct your attention then to page 163 in the paperback version. Maybe the book hardback is about 159, thereabouts. It's section 2 of the chapter, the Constitution, human depravity requires limited power. So we're going to look at how the founding fathers arranged and structured our government based on a biblical view of human nature. That is, that man is basically sinful, rebellious against God and his ways. And so therefore, you need to set into place various safeguards to protect the country from the natural sinfulness of the human heart. And we're going to see how this develops here within the Constitution. Lilbeck writes, Washington had learned by brutal experience the difficulties the Continental Congress had in getting the necessary work done to care for the Army. Remember, the Continental Congress was prior to the formation of the Constitution and the United States during the Revolutionary period. the Continental Congress was responsible for raising funds to support the Revolutionary Army, and they were having considerable difficulty doing that, so much so that Washington and the soldiers were out in Valley Forge, and they were freezing out in the winter there. So Washington knew very well the dangers and limits of a government. Toward the end of the war, Lilbeck writes, as we observed in the last chapter, he began to call for plans to strengthen the powers of government for the good of the whole nation. Ultimately, his concerns were shared by many, and the Constitutional Convention was held in Philadelphia in 1789. Remember the Declaration of Independence in 1776, so we're looking at 13 years of experience after that. Washington's religion manifested itself in various ways during that critical summer in Independence Hall, there, of course, in Philadelphia, the birthplace of freedom. I'm sure all of you who are watching on our Google website have had occasion to visit Independence Hall, see the Liberty Bell, and also the room where the convention was held. Interestingly enough, when I was in Brownwood, Texas, I was serving as a evangelist there, a church planter. They had a replica of the of Independence Hall, in particular the room where the Constitution was drafted. So that was kind of interesting. All the way out in Texas, having this, real life-size replica. It wasn't just like a model; it was a whole room with this kind of thing, and it's kind of interesting to see that all the way out in Texas. So Lilbeck continues, Washington's years of experience with people in the business context taught him the importance of contracts in light of human nature and what he termed the rascality of mankind. You recall Washington had his own business, as it were, before serving as the commander of the American armies. He had his own plantations and that sort of thing, and he had slaves that worked the plantations for him. And so he would have to make contracts or business deals selling whatever he produced or buying implements or what have you. And he noticed how people might welch on their deals, might not give him all that they were supposed to give him. They might have had a verbal agreement, a handshake, and that sort of thing. But sometimes he discovered that people were not inclined to make their word their bond too well. And so Washington speaks of the rascality of mankind. In other words, men are rascals. They cannot be relied upon to keep their word. They will deceive you. They will steal from you and all these kinds of things. And so where does Washington's view of human nature come from in that regard? Why doesn't he view people as basically good and good-hearted and generous? Why doesn't he just trust people and turn over to them whatever it was that they were asking for and trust them to do the right thing, do the good thing? Well, he understood by training within his Anglican church and also by experience in his the conduct of his business ventures and in the conduct of the war, that mankind is depraved. And that gets us into the doctrine of total depravity, which is a key foundational concept within Reformed Calvinistic thinking. You might be aware of the 5 points of Calvinism, these basic beliefs of the way of salvation and the work of God in the way of salvation, which begin with under the acronym TULIP, TULIP, T standing for total depravity, a description of human nature as entirely enslaved to sin. not to say that man is as sinful as he could be. That sinfulness is restrained by the fact that he's made in the image of God, restrained by the fact that God governs the world and has placed human governments in the world to try to restrain that wickedness. But there is a basic wickedness to the human heart. And Washington understood that, and he saw that by his own experience in life. And so, writing to Lund, Washington, which I guess was a relative of his. I don't know if it was a brother or what have you, but he said, quote, if this should be the case, it will be only adding to the many proofs we daily see of the folly of leaving bargains unbound by solemn covenants. I see so many instances of the rascality of mankind that I am almost out of conceit of my own species, and am convinced that the only way to make men honest is to prevent their being otherwise by tying them firmly to the accomplishment of their contracts. So, Washington understood that if you're going to enter into a business relationship with somebody, you better write down the terms of the contract and have signatures on that, and consequences for failure to uphold the terms of the contract. And so business contracts were necessary for the orderly uh, con- uh, activities of the economy. And we see that all the time now. You engage in a business deal with somebody, quite often there's an agreement you got to sign. You buy a house, you got to sign all kinds of papers. You buy a car, sign all kinds of papers. You even sign up on the internet for something. Quite often you have to sign a contract or read all the agreement that you're getting into. And who of us reads all the fine legal work that goes into all of that? You tend to assume that the contract is a normal business arrangement, and so you go ahead and go forward with it. But contracts are the foundation for an economy. And where does this idea of a contract arise? Well, you could say it's part of the image of God and man, but Scripture gives to us contracts in which God Himself makes a covenant with His people. You remember the writer to the Hebrews, as we'll get into later on, talks about how God came to Abraham and confirmed the promise with an oath. And then you have that scene in the book of Genesis where God has Abraham cut a covenant. He divides animals in half, and God symbolically through this smoking oven passes through the divided animals, effectively to say that if I don't fulfill the terms of the covenant, then may it be to me as it has been to these animals. God has taken a life and death oath to abide by the terms of the covenant made with Abraham, the promises that he would give him a seed and a land and so forth. And so God is a covenant making and covenant keeping God. The whole work of redemption is covenantally organized. Our relationship with God is grounded in a covenant whereby God binds Himself to us with various promises. And so this understanding of human relations flows out of God's own activity towards us and how He relates to us by means of a covenant. And we are in covenant with God. We have certain duties and obligations upon us. There was a covenant of works in the Garden of Eden to begin with Adam and Eve. And their breaking of that covenant has brought us into our current situation where we have the rascality of mankind. So Washington's views here have their source and origin in Christian faith, in the very heart of the Christian faith, in the way of salvation, and the way that God relates to us. It's not just kind of a handshake agreement or a verbal thing. God enters into a contract with us. Even God does. It's not that God is going to welch on the deal or lie to us or anything, but for our assurance. God enters into those contracts, and so we can know that if we believe in Christ, we are indeed saved. It's kind of funny to hear Washington talk about he's almost out of conceit of his own species. He's kind of fed up with humanity and sees how corrupt people are, and just kind of, I don't know, sometimes you kind of look at the animals and think maybe we would do better as a dog or a cat or what have you. Anyway, getting along here, Lilbach writes, the nation too needed a solemn covenant to assure its success. Washington's interest in a constitutional document is seen in the sheer frequency with which he speaks of the idea of the Constitution. The word appears over 400 times in his writings. Even at the start of the war in 1776, he understood the importance of preparing a sound constitution for excellent governance. Writing to his brother to encourage him in the Virginian effort to compose a new constitution, Washington said, and here's an extended quote, "Dear brother, since my arrival at this place, where I came at the request of Congress to settle some matters relative to the ensuing campaign, I have received your letter. To form a new government requires infinite care and unbounded attention. For if the foundation is badly laid, the superstructure must be bad too. Much time, therefore, cannot be bestowed in weighing and digesting matters well. We have no doubt some good parts in our present Constitution, many bad ones we know we have, wherefore no time can be misspent that is employed in separating the wheat from the tares. My fear is that you will all get tired and homesick, the consequence of which will be that you will patch up some kind of constitution as defective as the present. This should be avoided. Every man should consider that he is lending his aid to frame a constitution which is to render millions happy or miserable, and that a matter of such moment cannot be the work of a day." So Washington recognized that in order to have a sound government that provides for the peace and prosperity of its people, there needs to be a lot of effort and care shown to the formation of that Constitution. The Constitution is the foundation for the freedoms and liberties of the people. And if the Constitution is poorly grounded, if it has all kinds of mistakes and problems in it, then that's going to reverberate through the history of the people. And so Washington was urging his brother and presumably others in the Constitutional Convention to take their time to work through their differences, to evaluate proposals and hammer them out so that you can get a finished product that is worthwhile. Even so, as we'll see as we go along, Washington recognized that the Constitution that they agreed to at the end still had its weaknesses, still had some ways in which it could be remedied, at least in Washington's own view, and most everybody else had a similar view of the Constitution. He will point out the fact, however, that the Constitution does provide for the people to have a remedy to any particular problems that were severe or burdensome. They could have an amendment process whereby they could correct any defects in the Constitution. But they spent considerable time hammering out a constitution that would provide for the freedom and well-being of the nation. And indeed, they were remarkably successful, even as Washington will observe here. Lilbach continues, when the U.S. Constitution was under consideration by the nation, Washington himself became a keen political scientist in his own right. In fact, he claimed to have read every available publication that appeared in the debate. So here, Washington is not content to just come to some top of the mind decisions and go with that. He took time to get himself informed and to develop a critical judgment with regard to what things are good and useful, what things are problematic. And so this reflects, too, a Christian world and life view, which says that the Christian is able to explore and understand the various disciplines that God has placed within our world, whether it's government, arts, sciences, education, what have you. God has called us to subdue the earth, to engage in an understanding of the world that God has made and to develop it accordingly. And so Washington devoted himself to that end with his study of governments and constitutions in the past and the various proposals that were being made in the present. He wrote, quote, "The mind is so formed in different persons as to contemplate the same object in different points of view. Hence originates the difference on questions of the greatest import, both human and divine. In all institutions of the former kind, great allowances are doubtless to be made for the fallibility and imperfection of their authors. Although the agency I had in forming this system and the high opinion I entertained of my colleagues for their ability and integrity may have tended to warp my judgment in its favor, yet I will not pretend to say that it appears absolutely perfect to me, or that there may not be many faults which have escaped my discernment. I will only say that during and since the session of the convention, I have attentively heard and read every oral and printed information of both sides of the question that could readily be procured. This long and laborious investigation, in which I endeavored as far as the frailty of nature would permit to act with candor, has resulted in a fixed belief that this Constitution is really, in its formation, a government of the people. That is to say, a government in which all power is derived from and at stated periods reverts to them, and that in its operation it is purely a government of laws made and executed by the fair substitutes of the people alone. I wanted to highlight the beginning of this comment here where he talks about different people coming to the same subject with different perspectives, different points of view. And consequently, all these different points of view need to be evaluated and worked through. And some of these points of view, maybe even many of them, are defective in one way or another. And through the anvil of the competition of ideas, as these go back and forth, and iron sharpens iron, as the book of Proverbs says, they begin to whittle away until they get to something that is very close to being acceptable and reliable for the nation. Where does this idea come from? Well, this is a kind of, if you will, multi-perspectivalism, the idea that we can look at the same thing from different perspectives and appreciate different things about it. And the Constitution has to have these different perspectives blending together and forming this one document. And what is this but a reflection of the Trinity, where you have plurality in unity and unity in plurality? Three persons, one God, one being, three persons. And so this sense that on a human level, we have these different perspectives and they all need to be brought together and formed and shaped into one harmonious document here. I think in some ways reflects a Trinitarian understanding of the world that God has made, and two, as well, the fallibility of the human heart and how we tend to be led astray. Another aspect of this plurality in unity particularly in the area of human governments, is that this reflects a Presbyterian form of government. If you understand Presbyterianism, each local church is governed by a plurality of elders, not just by a single person, a bishop or a priest or what have you. You have a plurality of elders who meet to hammer out their decisions and work through compromises and so forth to come to hopefully a better decision for the sake of the well-being of the congregation. And so Presbyterianism makes use of a plurality of elders rather than a monarchy of one pastor ruling over the local church, which you might have in a Baptist type church, a fundamentalist type church, one charismatic pastor making all the decisions and everything going through him. You might have a pope in the Roman Catholic Church, or bishops, or priests. This monarchical system where authority resides in one particular individual, that can be problematic. The Anglican system is built on a similar framework, but Presbyterianism makes use of the plurality of elders, and this reflects the standard of scriptures. The Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 14, verse 23, goes about from one city to the next, appointing elders in every city, elders plural, not just a bishop, not just a pastor, plurality of elders established here and there, everywhere he went. In chapter 15, you have the apostles coming before the elders, plural, in Jerusalem to hammer out a decision. It's a plurality. It wasn't just one apostle making a decision. It was the whole group coming together to come to a decision. And that decision was communicated to the churches as the decision of the elders, plural. You have in Acts chapter 20, Paul calls upon the elders of Ephesus to meet him before he leaves the area. In Philippians chapter 1, you have an epistle addressed to the saints and the elders, the overseers of the church, plurality. Again, Paul in Titus 1, verse 5 says, I left you at Crete so that you could appoint elders in the church. Plurality. Even in heaven, Revelation 4, verses 4 and 5, you have, Revelation 4, verse 4, and you can see it also in chapter, looks like I've got 15, verses 2, 4, and 6. You have a plurality of elders in the heavens. So this whole idea of plurality in leadership is an important part of Christian faith as developed within our American system of government. So Lilback continues, from his unique vantage point of having presided at the Constitutional Convention and from his expertise in pursuing the entirety of the debate, Washington addressed the question of the merits of the proposed Constitution. Simply put, he recognized that it was not perfect. The people who would be governed by it would not be perfect either, given human nature. So the governors, the congressmen, the senators, the president and his staff and so forth, they're all fallible leaders, but the people themselves are fallible as well. And so you got sin upon sin. And in some ways, it's kind of remarkable that we come out with some good, just decisions from point to point. But at any rate, Washington recognized that there was this problem of the rascality of mankind. Writing to Lafayette on February 7th, 1788, he expressed his view that the state's agreement on the Constitution was near miraculous, but he also admitted that there were defects in the document. But his constitutional creed had two great points. The Constitution gave no more power than necessary to have a good government, and there were constitutional checks and balances on the government's use of power through popular rule and by the separation of powers among three branches that kept an eye on one another for the good of the nation. Beyond this, the Constitution also provided for its own amendment when citizens would find that necessary. So these two great points that Washington highlighted here, Washington was concerned to restrain power within the government. And so therefore the Constitution divided the powers and made co-equal branches, kind of like in the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, co-equal members of the Trinity. In our Constitution, co-equal powers, the executive, judicial, and legislative branches, each having their own sphere of labor, but each interacting and overseeing the other. And this helped to place limits on power and the abuse of power. In that light, I would recommend that you consider getting a hold of Mark Levin's new book on power, which is going to be published soon. You can get it at about 11% off on Amazon at the moment, but and pre-order. But he's going to go through the whole history of power within governments and that sort of thing. I'm not saying that Levin is a Christian. He's not. He's a Jew, a Judaistic man. So there'll be differences, but it's still an informative, enlightened understanding of human power and the need to restrain human power. Tyranny comes when power is ultimately reserved to one person, and he rules over everyone. And this results in slavery as one man exercises his power through various forms. So Washington understood that power needed to be restrained. And that in part is why within the Presbyterian government, you have a plurality of elders. You not only have a plurality of elders within the local church, you have a board of deacons as well, and plurality of leadership among them. Furthermore, you have higher courts within the Presbyterian system where you have broader regions of the church looking over decisions made by a particular local church to make sure that the local church is conforming to the scriptures and to the confession of faith and the form of government for the church. And so you have mutual oversight at multiple levels along the way. Why? Because there's a problem with human nature, because there is the rascality of the human heart, and that needs to be governed, managed, curbed at times through this kind of mutual oversight. And finally, Washington saw the need for an amendment process, which we have today. Okay, Washington's religion manifested itself precisely at this point in the constitutional debate. The ideas he expressed by terms such as limited power, the separation of powers, the rule of the people, checks and balances, and the need for amendment all existed for one simple reason: people abuse power. The idea of the abuse of power and political depravity were openly admitted at the Constitutional Convention and also seriously pondered by Washington. Political depravity is a theological concept that flows from the doctrine of human sinfulness, what I would describe as total depravity. It's a basic postulate of Christian teaching. In fact, Washington asserted that human depravity could ultimately destroy the Constitution, even with the checks and balances it possessed. In his proposed address to Congress in April of 1789, he described the Constitution with all of its wisdom could ultimately come to naught by the depravity of the people and those who govern them, since the Constitution in the hands of a corrupt people was a mere wall of words or a mound of parchment, quoting from Washington himself. So you can have the best Constitution, but it doesn't matter if the people don't abide by it. And when you have a wicked people who have no fear of God in their eyes and feel that morality is relativized, you have a situation much like you have in the book of Judges, where every man does that which is right in his own eyes. And so the Constitution itself just becomes a paper document, as Washington described it, just a mound of paper. They don't care what it has to say. They will do what they want to do. And so Washington understood total depravity. And what is a restraint to that total depravity? Well, the Constitution, the government does help to restrain that, but it needs to be exercised by a God-fearing people, by people that understand God's law, that they are accountable to God, and therefore they are more inclined to make just and right decisions. So you see here different ways in which the Christian faith, in terms of its doctrine of total depravity and how that doctrine works itself out in human relationships, the formation of covenants and the curbing of power through a plurality of leaders. These are things which arise out of Scripture itself, out of the Christian religion. They're not part of other religions or religious belief systems. Islam has a Unitarian God. There are no persons in the divine nature there. It's just one person that leads to a tyrannical approach. And you look at the governments in the Middle East, they're all led by one particular person, one individual, the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, various others throughout the Middle East. Their governments reflect their religion. The American government, in its formation and its development over time, has reflected the consensus of Christian faith within the life of the nation. And as we depart from that faith and move towards a secular, humanistic, atheistic world and life view, we are in that place that Washington was concerned about, where the corruption of people is so great and so vast that the Constitution just gets overwhelmed and just becomes a paper tiger and gets moved out of the way. And we have been very, very, very close to that point. In fact, it's been ongoing in recent years, in my judgment. So I hope that this is helpful, enlightening, and it gives you a sense of appreciation for our founding fathers and their understanding of how Christian faith interacts with governments, and how they tried to form their government in ways which reflect the values that they either consciously or unconsciously held to in view of the Christian culture and Christian faith commitments of many in that day. Well, we'll pick this up again, God willing, next time. Hope that you'll join us for that at about 9:15 next Saturday morning. Until then, may God bless you. And please sign up, join our channel, subscribe, and then take part in some of our other studies as well on Wednesdays at 10 o'clock and our Sunday worship services at 9:30. And even better, come join us here in Perkasie, Pennsylvania. Our church is located on the corner of 5th and Ray Streets, and you are more than welcome to come and visit and to hear the gospel preached. God bless and take care.